Charles Wendell David was a noted American bibliophile, medievalist, and librarian. He worked tirelessly both to reconstruct Europe's war-torn repositories and to establish new libraries in the United States. Biography. A modest American farm boy, he went to college on scholarships, and achieved a Rhodes Scholarship before returning to establish his academic career at Harvard and Bryn Mawr. David pioneered the open-access concept of the college library, throwing open the doors to all students before arriving in Philadelphia to serve the University of Pennsylvania as its first director of libraries, where he transformed the dilapidated collection into America's first centralized, open-access library in its modern form. Professor David retired to West Chester, Pennsylvania, where he continued to mentor and educate until his death in 1984. Historical studies, empathizing with the financial and travel problems of his students in European history, and anticipating the return of Europe to censorship and war. Professor David traveled Europe in the mid-1930s determined to create rotogravure copies of manuscripts so that these works would remain available to American scholars. Consequently, certain of his rotogravures are the only remaining images of manuscripts destroyed or damaged by the war, or that have since become deteriorated or misplaced. This collection became part of the Modern Language Association photo imagery collection at the Library of Congress, where it remains today. Professor David published his critical edition of a rare Third Crusade manuscript through the American Philosophical Association in 1939, using one of his rotogravures to complete his study. This manuscript was in fair condition before the war, but its pages are now blank. This manuscript contains very important information about medieval sailing and pilgrimage that would have been lost without Professor David's work. Medievalist Dana Cushing now studies and lectures on Professor David's rotogravure copy of the manuscript. She provides a free, public-access digital copy of the manuscript and of Professor David's critical edition of it by kind permission of the Library of Congress, which owns the rotogravure copies, the Accademia delle Scienze di Torino, which owns the original manuscript, and the American Philosophical Society, which published Professor David's 1939 article. Over 80 years later, Professor David's book about the Siege of Lisbon and the Der Expugnation Lisbonense remains the authoritative study, entitled Der Expugnation Lisbonense, The Conquest of Lisbon. The book was recently revised by noted Crusades historian Dr. Jonathan Phillips for a paperback reissue. Most of Professor David's medieval and librarianship books remain available, if not in print. Legacy. The public can visit two libraries he founded: a library for America's history of her season sailing located at Mystic Seaport, Connecticut, and a library for America's industrial heritage located at Longwood, Delaware.